Have you ever felt the pressure to find yourself? Like there's a version of you, pure, authentic, hidden, waiting somewhere out there to be discovered. Maybe in a faraway country. Maybe through a spiritual retreat. Maybe through quitting your job and starting over. It's a tempting idea that somewhere beneath the layers of confusion, pain, and performance, there's a real you. You just have to find it. But what if the search itself is the illusion? What if clinging to the idea of a true self is what keeps us lost? From a Buddhist perspective, the very concept of finding yourself may be the root of your restlessness, not the cure. Not because there's nothing to find, but because what you're really looking for has never been missing. There's a quiet ache beneath the question, who am I, really? An ache that begins early in life and echoes through adolescence into adulthood. You hear it in the silence after a breakup. You feel it in the disorientation of a career change. You carry it in moments of loneliness, when the noise of the world quiets down and you're left only with yourself, and you're not quite sure who that is. So we begin the search. We change cities, switch jobs, dye our hair, meditate in foreign temples. We scroll through personality tests. We read self-help books. We ask astrology apps to describe us better than we can describe ourselves. And it all seems so reasonable, so hopeful. After all, what could be more important than knowing who you truly are? But beneath that noble-sounding pursuit is a dangerous assumption. An assumption that runs counter to everything the Buddha saw as liberating. The assumption that the self is a thing. Something to be found, named, held onto. We don't always say it that way, but listen to how people talk when they're figuring themselves out. I just need to find my path. This isn't the real me. I finally discovered who I was meant to be. It sounds like there's a treasure buried beneath the surface of our personality. Like we are archaeologists of our own being, brushing away the dust to reveal the statue of our true self underneath. But here's the quiet truth that Buddhist practice invites us to face, not as dogma, but as direct experience. There is no statue. There is no hidden, solid, unchanging self beneath the surface. There is only the brushing. There is only this moment's becoming. The Buddha taught what is known as anatta, the principle of non-self. But let's not get caught in that word. Let's not make it into another philosophy to debate. Let's stay close to life. Think back to your childhood self. Not just the photos, but the feel of being that person. The way your mind worked. The things you feared. The way you saw the world. That person is gone. Not just changed. Gone. In their place is you. But this you is not finished either. You are still becoming, changing, responding, evolving. You are not a noun. You are a verb. To look for a solid self inside this stream of experience is like scooping your hands into a river and hoping to catch the current. But still, we try. Because without a fixed self, we feel untethered. Who are we, if not our personalities? What are we, if not our stories? We look to roles for security: daughter, son, parent, artist, entrepreneur. We look to traits: I'm an introvert, I'm a leader, I'm spiritual. But life has a funny way of peeling those layers off when we least expect it. A job loss, a divorce, a diagnosis. Suddenly the identity we clung to doesn't fit anymore. And so we panic. We think, I've lost myself. But what if you didn't lose anything? What if the self was never meant to be something you find? There's an old story, maybe you've heard it before. A group of monks lose track of one of their companions. After crossing a river, they count heads. Only 9. Panic sets in. One monk says, he must have drowned. Another shouts, we have to go back. But just before they dive back in, a passerby notices and asks what's wrong. The monks explain, they're missing a member. The passerby smiles and says, there are 10 of you. You just forgot to count yourself. That's what our search for self often looks like. We chase endlessly, assuming something is missing. But perhaps the only thing missing is the awareness that nothing is. In the modern world, this becomes even more complicated. We live in a time where identity is curated. Online, we become profiles, brands, aesthetics. We don't just live, we present, we perform. And so the question, who am I, becomes even louder. Not because we're closer to truth, but because we're trapped in a hole of mirrors. Buddhist wisdom doesn't tell us we are nothing. That's a common misunderstanding. Rather, it invites us to see that we are not fixed, not stuck, not bound. You are not a thing to be discovered. You are a process to be witnessed. But the ego doesn't like this. The ego wants answers. It wants a neatly wrapped identity that says, "This is who I am," so it can feel secure. Unfortunately, reality doesn't cooperate. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha speaks of contemplating the body as just the body, the feelings as just feelings, the mind as just mind. He doesn't say my mind or myself. He invites us to look at experience without clinging to ownership. This isn't an abstract idea. It's an invitation to sit quietly, to watch thought arise, to notice feeling pass, to see the self not as a sculpture to admire, but as a cloud moving across the sky, shapeless, beautiful, ever-changing. It might sound unsettling at first, but what if it's the beginning of peace? What if, instead of finding yourself, you simply stop clinging to the idea that there's someone to find? What if being here, fully, openly, without needing to define or defend, is enough? Let the idea of a fixed self begin to soften, not to erase you, but to free you. There is a gentle liberation in realizing. Imagine standing in a vast hall filled with mirrors. You move a little, and 100 versions of you move too. You raise your hand, and so do they, but none of them are real. They reflect, they echo, but they don't breathe. This is what happens when we chase identity. We become lost in reflections, not because we are shallow, but because we are searching for something solid in a world built on change. And identity, oh, how it promises solidity. It says, wear me and you'll be someone. Own me and you'll feel whole. We listen, we pick a label, or a few. We say, I'm an artist, I'm a minimalist, I'm a free spirit, I'm not like other people. Sometimes it feels empowering, other times it becomes a cage. Because once we've chosen a version of ourselves to believe in, we start defending it. We build walls around it. We judge anything that doesn't fit. We think we've found who we are, but in truth we've just traded one mask for another. There's a story in Buddhist tradition about a man shot with a poisoned arrow. His friends rush to help him, but he refuses their aid. Wait, he says, I need to know who shot me. What kind of wood is the arrow made from? Was the bow curved or straight? What direction did it come from? And as he waits for answers, he dies. The Buddha used this story to show how unnecessary questions and attachments can delay liberation. Likewise, our obsession with defining ourselves can become the arrow we won't pull out. We wait for the perfect label. We wait to become some ideal version of ourselves. Meanwhile, life is bleeding out through our fingers. We don't notice how this chasing becomes suffering. We don't see how it creeps into everything. We curate perfect photos, hoping they reflect something real. We seek approval from strangers online to feel valid. We compare our inner world to someone else's highlight reel. Even spiritual seekers aren't immune. We chase the identity of the awakened one. We sit in perfect posture, speak in careful tones, burn incense, not always because we're present, but because it looks like presence. And deep down we might think, if I just try hard enough, I'll become enlightened. I'll finally become my true self. But this too is shadow chasing. The Buddha didn't become free by becoming someone. He became free by letting go of someoneness. When Siddhartha left the palace, he wasn't finding himself. He was stepping into not knowing, into rawness, into groundlessness. He tried identities too: ascetic, sage, student. He starved himself. He practiced with masters. And finally he sat under the Bodhi tree, not to find, but to stop running. And in that stillness, he saw clearly. The shadows disappeared. There's a moment in our own lives when we get tired of becoming, tired of performing, of adjusting the mask, of wondering whether people see the real us. In those moments, even a simple question like "Who am I?" can feel heavy, because the truth is, we're not always the same person. We change with context. We shift with seasons. We contradict ourselves. And that's not a flaw. That's a freedom. But modern life often turns it into anxiety. We say things like, "I feel fake. I'm not being true to myself. I need to go on a journey to find who I really am." But here's the secret. When you stop trying to be someone, a quiet joy begins to emerge. Not because you've found yourself, but because you've stopped clinging to the idea that you were ever missing. We could learn something from nature here. A river does not ask itself, "Am I authentic?" The wind doesn't worry, "Am I living my purpose?" They move, they respond, they are what they are, in this moment, and something else in the next. You too are like this. But the mind wants control. It says, choose a version and stick to it. It says, don't be confusing, be consistent. And so we shrink. We squeeze ourselves into an identity that might fit today, but will suffocate us tomorrow. You don't need to fight this. You just need to see it. You are not the reflection in the mirror. You are the one standing behind the glass, quiet, watching, changing. And when you realize this, you can let others change too. You stop needing to define everyone around you. You soften when someone you love acts differently than they used to. You stop saying, "You've changed," like it's a crime, because now you understand. Change isn't betrayal, it's nature. There's a strange relief in knowing that your identity isn't fixed. It means you don't have to hold everything together all the time. You don't have to prove you are someone. You are allowed to be confused. You are allowed to be inconsistent. You are allowed to grow. And in that space, something deeper than identity starts to move. Not a version of you, but awareness itself, presence, stillness, spaciousness. It doesn't need a label. It doesn't need to be found. It's been with you all along. Not in your name, not in your personality, but in the silence that watches it all arise and pass. This is not a truth to believe. It's a truth to rest in. So the next time you feel lost, maybe don't reach for a new identity. Maybe sit quietly. Let the shadows move. Let the mirrors shatter. And see what's left when there's nothing left to find. At some point in the search, you stop moving. Not because you've given up, but because something in you whispers, enough. You've run through the fields of reinvention. You've worn enough masks to last a lifetime. You've spent nights asking the ceiling, who am I supposed to be? And now the question itself feels tired. So you sit, not because you know what to do, but because you finally realize you don't have to do anything. This is where Buddhist practice quietly meets you, not in fanfare or revelation, but in stillness, in the simple act of breathing and knowing you are breathing, in the gentle pause between one thought and the next, in the tender awareness that watches your need to be someone slowly unravel. You may have heard this said in many ways, that the lotus grows in muddy water, that the moon is always there, behind passing clouds, that the ocean, though stirred on the surface, remains calm in its depths. These aren't poetic ornaments. They are mirrors, reflecting something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten. Your true refuge is not in becoming more. It is in needing less. Think of a snow globe. Shake it, and the flakes swirl in frantic beauty. We often live like this, stirred up, chasing identity, meaning, validation. But when you set the globe down, everything settles. And in the stillness, you can finally see what was always inside. Buddhist meditation isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's not even about improving your mind. It's about seeing clearly, about resting in awareness. So quiet, so intimate, that the need to be anyone slowly dissolves, not in a frightening way, but like mist dissolving under the morning sun. There's a story, simple and ancient, of the Buddha sitting under the Buddha tree. After years of seeking, striving, starving, following teachers, punishing his body, chasing truth like a man dying of thirst, he stopped. He simply sat, and in that great silence, without clinging to an idea of who he was or what he should become, he awakened, not because he found a new self, but because he let go of the need for one. This stillness isn't something dramatic. You don't have to renounce the world to touch it. You don't need incense or mantras or robes. You only need willingness. Willingness to stop chasing the next version of yourself long enough to feel what's already here. The rise and fall of your breath, the hum of life around you, the gentle noticing, this too. And when you sit with that, not forcing, not fixing, something softens, the grasping loosens, and suddenly, the world feels less like a stage, and more like a place you belong without performing. It's not about indifference, it's about intimacy, because when you no longer need to define yourself, you become more available to life as it is. You can listen without needing to respond cleverly. You can feel without filtering everything through identity. You can be present, not as someone being present, but just presence itself. And strangely, this doesn't make you less real, it makes you more here. Think of a musician lost in the flow of music. In that moment, they're not performing. They're not even thinking, I am a musician. They've disappeared into the act itself. This is what stillness offers, not escape, but immersion. There is a term in Zen, no mind, not meaning empty-headed, but a mind unburdened by self-reference. When you walk with no mind, the grass seems greener. When you eat with no mind, the food tastes fuller. When you breathe with no mind, even pain softens into sensation. This stillness isn't passive. It doesn't mean you stop working, or dreaming, or growing. It just means you're no longer chasing shadows while the sunlight is right here. You stop trying to become someone, and start responding to life directly. And slowly, your center shifts, from identity to awareness, from story to presence, from noise to knowing. You begin to taste a different kind of freedom, not the freedom of finally becoming the real you, but the freedom of no longer needing to. In the Udana, the Buddha said, there is monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded. Were there not this unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded, there would be no escape from the born, the become, the made, the compounded. It sounds abstract, but it's pointing to this. There is a quiet in you that doesn't need to be built, a spaciousness that was never born, so it can never die. When you stop reaching for the next self, you begin to rest in that which has always been present, not as a person, not as a label, but as life itself, awake, aware, at ease. And from that stillness, something beautiful happens. You start living, not according to a script, but in alignment with the moment. Not worried about who you are, but curious about what's needed now. You wash dishes with care. You speak with kindness. You laugh without trying to be funny. You cry without needing to justify your tears. You move, not to get somewhere, but because life moves through you. This is the middle way, not the path of self-importance, not the path of self-negation, but the path of gentle release. You don't need to find yourself. You need only to stop losing yourself in the chase. And when the chase ends, you begin to see, this moment is complete. This breath is home. This presence is enough. So then, if there's nothing to find, how do you live? If you're not on a quest to uncover a hidden self, if there's no fixed identity to define you, then what becomes of your life? Your goals? Your relationships? Here's where many people hesitate. They think, if I don't know who I am, how can I make decisions? Won't I become aimless, indifferent, invisible? But what they're really asking is this: without a strong identity to hold on to, can I still matter? And the answer, from a Buddhist perspective, is not only yes, but only then do you begin to live fully. Not by clinging to being someone, but by responding to life as it unfolds, moment by moment, with clarity and compassion. It's like this: when you stop asking the mirror for answers, you start seeing the world more clearly. You no longer enter a room wondering, how should I present myself? You ask, what does this moment need? You no longer mold yourself to be liked. You simply show up with presence, with care. You are no longer preoccupied with becoming authentic. You are just here, and that is authenticity. This shift from identity to presence is subtle but transformative. You still have a name, a story, a personality, but you hold it lightly, like a well-worn coat, not a suit of armor. You don't forget your past. You just stop letting it dictate your future. And with this lightness comes incredible freedom. You're no longer haunted by the question, am I being true to myself? Because yourself isn't a thing you have to obey. It's a fluid process that unfolds with care and attention. Imagine sitting in a garden. The flowers don't worry about what kind of flower they are. The tree doesn't compare itself to the bush. The breeze doesn't try to define itself. Everything simply expresses its nature, not by trying, but by being. You too can live this way, not passively, but attentively. The more you let go of the demand to be someone, the more space you create for wisdom to arise in each situation. You begin to speak not to impress, but to connect. You begin to listen not to respond, but to understand. You begin to love, not to complete yourself, but to care without clinging. This is not about becoming empty. It's about being open. And openness, in Buddhist teaching, is a doorway to compassion. When you're no longer consumed by the question, who am I? You begin to genuinely see others. You see the fear behind their pride, the longing behind their anger, the tenderness behind their silence. Because you've seen it in yourself, you know what it's like to feel unsure, fragmented, lost. So instead of judging others, you soften, you hold space. And this is where the real fruit of non-self ripens. Not in some abstract philosophical insight, but in your ability to meet life with gentleness. There's a well-known story from the Zen tradition. A monk asked a master, "What is the way?" The master replied, "Ordinary mind is the way." The monk asked, "Should I try to direct myself toward it?" The master said, "If you try to direct yourself, you go away from it." This story points to something profound. You don't need to become anything. You just need to stop resisting what is already here. Your ordinary life, breathing, walking, washing dishes, comforting a friend, is the way. No identity needed. No enlightenment badge required. You are not a self waiting to be discovered. You are a field of awareness where life flows in and out. Thoughts arise. Emotions come and go. Sensations flicker and fade. When you stop trying to freeze that flow into an identity, you start dancing with it. And life, at last, feels alive. Even your suffering changes. You no longer say, "This pain is me." You say, pain is present." And that small shift creates space. You no longer say, "I'm anxious." You say, "Anxiety is arising." And in that moment, you are not the anxiety. You are the awareness holding it. This spaciousness is not distant. It's intimate. It lets you be fully human without being trapped in your humanity. You laugh, you cry, you stumble, you grow, but all of it moves through an open sky, not a locked room. There is nothing to become. There is only this moment, inviting your attention, your tenderness, your trust. And the more you live this way, the more natural it becomes. You don't have to remind yourself to be present. You just are, because there's nothing else you need to be. You don't have to find yourself in order to live meaningfully. You only have to stop abandoning this moment in search of another. What would happen if you let go of the search? What would happen if just for today, you stopped trying to become and simply allowed yourself to be? Not the polished version, not the lost version, just this raw, unfiltered, breathing, aware. Maybe that is what freedom really is. Not a self you finally become, but a self you no longer need. So breathe, not to improve yourself, but to feel alive. Walk, not to get somewhere, but to be here. Love, not to define who you are, but because love is what remains when there is no self to protect. You don't need to find yourself. You need only to stop believing you are ever missing. And in that gentle surrender, a deeper truth begins to shine. You were never a fixed thing. You were never broken. You were never incomplete. You are life, unfolding, mysterious, enough, now, always now.